He understood a lot of things, and my thought was, what are some of the things that he did, that he did that we could understand better to make our relationship better? Because we still have ways of falling to that temptation. But Christ did a lot of things that would help him, but his understanding of what the Father was and his commitment to what the Father wanted him to do because of who he is, who Jesus is, his Son, that is something that maybe we need a little bit stronger sometimes in our minds and in our hearts. So all I did was I took one word and the derivative of it, pray, prayer, prayed, praise, many different ways, and I just put that in one of my computer programs that would pull up all the information on it, and just started to look at some of the things about pray. What did Jesus do that would help us? Now, it isn't just the word prayer that I used, but in that sentence, wherever it's at, there's certain things that happen in that sentence that took place that would help us maybe to grasp a little bit differently, or stronger, or recommit, whatever the case is, to make it a little bit easier for us to understand what we need to do to have that relationship be cleaner, be pure, be better, instead of falling to the temptation, because that does happen. It's interesting. The first thing that we see about Jesus is when he's like 12, 13 years old, and he's in Jerusalem. And his statement to his parents when they couldn't find him was, I need to be in my Father's house. Why are you looking for me? I need to be in my Father's house. It isn't something that they understood at such a young age to understand that their child was going to be that way. And we wish for our children to be that way, perhaps, but that's just something that maybe we don't portray to our children in the right manner, or maybe we aren't as committed that way. Things to think about. And to help our children, grandchildren, whatever the case is, we're always helping somebody and teaching somebody. And then all the way to the end, when Christ is on the cross, into my hands I commend my spirit, and he does pass on. So the first thing I did was I pulled up the word pray, and we started off in Matthew chapter 5. Matthew chapter 5, and some of these, since I'm just using Jesus' words, I'm looking Matthew, Mark, and Luke, a little bit of John, depends on your translation. In the New American Standard, the word pray is not in there. I was really surprised. There's different words for that, to ask, to request, those kind of things, and then depends on your translation. Pray might be put in there, but in the New American Standard, it was not. So, and that, I wasn't actually, when I was talking to the teens about that, or that was temptation. No, it wasn't. It was pray. I had that down here. Then I realized it was the New American Standard that I took all that information from. King James has it. Almost every other translation has it. Not often, but it is there. Okay, I didn't even move to that part yet. Matthew 5, and specifically we're looking towards the verses 44 and 45. In Luke, it's very similar. It'd be Luke 6, 27, 28, but it's basically the same thing. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Is this something that he did? This is going to be a question to you. I'm looking for answers now. Is this something that he personally did? When? Do you remember the situation he was in? On the cross? Yeah. He definitely did that on the cross. He forgave the one of the thieves on the cross. He recognized that because he recognized who Jesus is. The other guy was still just out there. If we would read, I think there's a few others that we could probably think of. And that's what I want you guys to go ahead and bring that to your mind. What are some of the other times, you may not say it now or share it whenever, but when did Jesus do some of these things that we could grasp that he did them? Love your enemies, pray for those. He definitely prayed for those. What happens when we pray for those who persecute us? What happens to us personally when we pray for those people? Okay, it does give us a different frame of mind to think about, or puts us in a different frame of mind. It gives us peace. We can let go of some things when we're praying for someone who is persecuting us. And sometimes you're in situations that it's almost, you feel like, at least today, right now, you're thinking about that, and you don't want to be in that situation. How can I forgive somebody until you're actually in that situation? Then maybe you'll think about it differently. All right? It makes us easier to forgive. I'll repeat some of this, and if you're in back, you can't really hear it. But it does make it easier for me as a person to forgive someone who is doing something against me. I think about them differently. I can actually go back and talk to them in a polite manner than after I have had that thought process, go through my process of forgiving somebody and having that relationship actually stronger with God. Just a simple statement, be still and know that I am God. During that time, it makes it a little easier to be still, be thankful to God for what that relationship is, but then to give that over to God. And that makes it a little easier to be still as well. It's real easy to retaliate, especially today on Facebook. I'm still surprised at how many people who claim to be Christians, not necessarily members of the church, but still claim God to be their number one priority, how they go ahead and still do things on Facebook that are the vulgarity, for one thing, that goes with it, but also something that's very demeaning, and that's not really helping that whole conversation to be a little bit better. But Jesus did do that. I mean, he did call out the Pharisees and those kind of things at times, but he still prayed for them because they can still come to Christ. They can still be forgiven. They can still have that relationship with God, but they have to understand what it is. It doesn't mean that you're going to always say, we're having a great conversation. You're not going to say that if it's something that's really horrible. You may have to call somebody out on something, but it's to help them understand what the relationship is, and that's what Christ would do. He was there to help. Matthew 6:5-6. When you pray, you must not be like the hypocrites, for they love to stand and pray in the synagogues and on street corners that they may be seen by others. Truly I say to you, they have received their reward. But when you pray, go into your room and shut the door and pray to your Father who's in secret, and your Father who's in secret will reward you. Just a couple of things we can take away. And I'm speaking to an audience basically who really understands these things, but still, do we carry those through? That's the part that we need to grasp. Do we actually carry it out? I have never seen anybody from this congregation or any of the churches where I've been who stand up like the hypocrite would do out in public just to pray for, listen to me, my good words, and repeat and repeat and repeat and those kind of things. I think we have a grasp on that. That is something I'm thankful for. But how about the rest of it? Do we pray in private? So the Father who sees us in private will reward you. I'm thinking most of us have taken that to heart, especially in this age group. That is something we learn, as Carla and a few other folks already brought up. I think the older we get, and I'm putting words in the mouth now, but the older we get, it seems like we do these things, it's easier to forgive. We can go ahead and give that relationship to God a lot better that way. But do we look at the last part of verse 6? Anything that we say that you have that relationship with your Father, do we remember that God has given you a reward after? He will reward you. It may be something that we get in our lifetime, and it might be the reward is eternity with him. That we don't know that one exactly how. I didn't really look up to see how the sentences are made up or anything like that. I'm not that guy to really understand that part. But I can look up words and look up some things. Excuse me, I got to catch my breath every now and then. Lungs are still a little bit tight this morning. And if I don't slow down to breathe, I may fall on the floor here just trying to get a little bit too dizzy then. Not a good thing. But the reward, if you understand that you have been rewarded after a prayer has been given to God in secret, and God who hears these things, remember, we need to say thank you for that as well. That's just something that we need to offer, that Jesus is teaching us about that. In Matthew 6, 9 through 13, this is the part where they're talking about the prayer that the disciples wanted to learn. Since John taught his disciples to pray, they were asking Jesus, teach us to pray as well. Now, the very first thing he says is, Father, my Father. And something that I think I've heard this before, but I kind of forgotten about it. In the Old Testament, when I was looking up Father, and I didn't look how many times it was in the Old Testament, but in the King James Version, it was 960-something times Father was used. In the New American Standard, it was 1,001 or something like that, the Father's used. But the Father in the Old Testament was never referred to as Abba, Father, my Father. It was always my Father, Jacob, my father, or whoever my father is. This is the first time that Jesus refers to God as my Father, and that's how we can now understand that as well. I think I want to say I've heard that before, but it really didn't strike me as something that I remember very strongly. This is kind of new, and this is part of why Jesus was being persecuted by the leaders as well. He's equating himself very similar to, like, I'm part of God, I am God in a sense. And that's where some of that persecution came in. So maybe that's why I understood my Father was something that was different. But at the same time, I just kind of forgotten in the Old Testament, they never referred to, it was always my God, the God of my Father. There's a couple other statements that they would use that they would refer to God, but never as their Father. But this is the first time that they did in this case. And it became part of who we are. And then he goes on. This is something else that we need to, hallowed be thy name. What does the hallowed part mean? And I kind of grasp that that's a cool thing, that's really good, but what does it mean that you guys understand it to be? Holy. Anything else? Okay, I know forever? Reverence. Reverence, okay. Andrew? Honor. Okay. When I looked it up on the word means to make holy, consecrate, sanctify. We have other words that kind of go along with that, but this was the one that was used to translate from the New American Standard. The actual word to hallowed means those kind of things. And that's another thing, how often do we think about God in that way? I mean, we want to pray to God, but do we look at him in that way when we're in prayer? And actually times change when I do offer prayer. There's times when I look at it in a very reverent way, and there's times when I look at it, I just need to share a burden with you. You're my Father. I just need to talk to you for a while. It depends on my situation, but reverence is always something that we need to have in our mind when we're doing this. And then it goes into thy kingdom come. And really the kingdom means, in this case, sovereignty, royal power. Thy kingdom come. And then thy will be done. And That's kind of like to come into being, to happen, to become in his will. Is there anything else out of this prayer, and there's more to the prayer, but was there anything in here that you can bring out that would say Jesus is telling us something a little bit different than maybe what they had in the Old Testament? Forgive the sins of others, or forgive my sins as I forgive the sins of somebody else. Someone who has sinned, who has hurt me and really kind of made a relationship maybe a little bit rough. That's something that, again, we kind of brought that up a little earlier. Letting it go. It may mean, well, let me back up first. It may mean that we still have to talk to the person about that, especially if they're stealing things. But it isn't something that we're going to hold on to that continuously. It may be the other person isn't even thinking about it anymore, but it's on your mind a lot. And even if it's not even somebody who has stole something from you, but you had a conversation that wasn't in the best way. Somebody really hurts you verbally because of and shared some things that maybe was private to others that you had a relationship with them that hurts. That may be something that you really have to have that conversation about, but share that with God and letting it go. That is the important part. And the more you hang on to it, it may be that the other person doesn't even think about it anymore. I've heard of situations where people have decided they wanted to go ahead and talk it out 2 or 3 years later. They finally got it in their head. They got to talk it out and get it over. And the other guy kind of already forgotten about it. They don't even remember what had taken place. And here we sat holding that in our hearts, holding that in our minds, and actually having some stress over something that didn't really exist on the other person's behalf. It was just on my behalf. Letting it go, giving it to God. God is going to deal with what he has to deal with in the other person's heart. I may be part of that to make that better, but at the same time, God is going to deal with that person, and that's just what we need to let God do. That's his way of dealing with it. Jesus several times spent time alone in prayer. There's different situations that he did. He did it early in the morning. He did it late at night. It would be after stressful times that were going on, people trying to kill him or something going on. And he would, after he would dismiss crowds, he would go and pray by himself. He would just do that. That was just his heart. He needed to have that conversation with God. What are some of the times that you want to sit and pray personally by yourself? What kind of situations do you find yourself in? I'm not looking for specifics, because sometimes that's not easy to share. But if you have something you can share, please do so. It does help. It does help other people here. Okay, great joy, great stress. Either one, but you're spending time with God. Sadness, pressure, feeling alone. You're never alone, but you sure feel like it at times. And maybe physically you are, but sometimes what usually is mentally you may be on your own because you're not asking for help. You're not getting help in the way that maybe you really wanted it. Again, one of the statements are, I forget what it was, streams in the desert. That was one of the things that I'll read every now and then. One of the ladies had so much stress on her mind, as you're talking about, and it was the statement that she finally realized, be still, just be still, and know who I am. And once she was able to do that, it made a big difference in understanding God is here. But she had to change the focus of where she was at. Jesus teaches us to be still. He would go and share, at times, prayers with his friends, but usually it was by himself. He would be still and know and share with God what's going on in his life and be encouraged because he is physically here, going through pain, going through stresses, going through things that we experience, but he wants to make sure that that relationship with his Father is pure. That's what I'm hoping we can take away from whatever we're talking about. Our relationship later on is going to be pure the more we think about it. As Jesus was a carpenter and he got a sliver on his finger, I have no idea what he would think or say. No idea. I know what I used to think and say, and it's quite different now because I've learned to let a lot of those physical pains, even though I don't like them. I mean, you shake my finger, you're gonna hurt, that kind of thing. But I got to work to get it better again. That's all I need to do. But there's a lot of things when I hear people smack their finger with a hammer or pinch it in a door or watch a child pinch their fingers in something that it's really hard to let some of that go in a way, because I just want to be there to help them. But they also have to learn by your example, my example, of what it means to go through the physical pain as well as the emotional pain, because they will watch us and how we're going to handle it, and they will follow suit. Watching little Josiah, Carter, Ethan, all these little ones that you're around so often, just go ahead and name whoever you had in your head. What do they see you doing that you kind of wish, I wish I had that one back? But can we think about it before we say something? Can we think about it before we have that physical reaction? Jim Kuhorn's preacher up in Wisconsin. He remembers his dad hitting himself with a hammer and just letting out a lot of words. But he also remembers his grandfather, who was bending down working on a tractor, because they're farmers. He got up and just banged his head hard on the tractor, and all he did was just walk around and go, and that was it. That was it. Now, Jim, being a teenager, sees his dad, who's not as old as his dad, who has learned how to deal with some things, how to think through some things in the relationship with God. Because if you don't have that relationship with God, a lot of people will just do whatever they want to do no matter what. And I see that a lot. See that quite often. Do you sit and pray with the children? This is something that Jesus did. When they were bringing the children to him, if and I don't know if you're writing things down or not, but Matthew 19, verse 13, that's the one I'm referring to. They brought him to be touched and to be prayed over, but his disciples really were kind of telling the parents and getting the kids away from him, listen, he's got other things to do. But Jesus has them in their mind, in their way of living to learn. They need to learn what Jesus is about anyway. So he is laying his hands on them. What happens when you touch children? It's just kind of neat to see some of the relationship become a little bit softer. Some of them who are kind of standoffish and you hold their hand or something like that, or even touch them sometimes. You have to be careful nowadays, but normally it's a little bit softer time frame for them. They learn to trust you just by the human touch. But then to pray for them, now that is special. And I'm so happy that we have that up here, that we have people who will pray for our children, and they're learning that people pray for me. Therefore, they start to understand that big person's up there who's praying for me has a relationship with the Father. I can do that too. Those are the things that we need to share. And Jesus was doing that at that time, even when the disciples were saying the children probably should be seen and not heard kind of thing, but Jesus is very different. He wants to see them, wants to touch them, wants to pray for them, and probably had a conversation with them as well. That's the only way that I can think about Jesus having a relationship with people, is to converse with them, whether they're older or younger. How about the transfiguration? Well, the time when Jesus was with a couple of his disciples, and they had that time of conversation. Jesus had that transfiguration place, and he went up to the mountain to pray first. That's when what we call the transfiguration took place. And then what happened after that? What did the disciples want to do? They just wanted to build a little something for the people that were with him. Well, that isn't what Jesus went up to pray about, or even to think about, or even to talk about. He just went to pray to the Father. But he understood, Jesus being very different than who we are, had a relationship with the Father that's very different than we are, but we're trying to understand what it is to have that as well. I'm not going to say that we're going to have appearance of somebody that's been long dead be with us. I'm not going to say anything like that. But the relationship is, we understand what the other people have gone through before. We understand what Joseph, who kept himself pure by leaving the area when Potiphar's wife wanted to because he couldn't do that to his God. That temptation was there. All of a sudden, I'm dropping the names of the people who were supposed to be there. I cannot think of them right now. Anyway, to build a monument to those folks, that is not what Jesus was there for. He was there to understand and have a prayer time talking to the Father, and that's what we need to look at as well. Yes, and that's something else when I was reading. That's the first time that I actually heard or read where God interrupted somebody to say, listen, this is my son. Listen to him. I'm very pleased with him. And that had to do with that relationship that he had with the Father. But the Transfiguration was kind of a little bit of an interesting time, for a challenge for maybe the people that were with him at right then. It doesn't say that they were praying, but it says that Jesus went to pray and take that time. Another time that he took his people up to pray, Peter, James, and John, was before his crucifixion. This is a time that's very trying for Jesus. What do you see? What are some of the takeaways? Because we all have probably gone through that before. What are some of the takeaways? Because I don't want to keep on talking. What are some of the takeaways that you guys have from what took place during that time? Mainly in reference to Jesus' prayer. That's what I wanted to really focus on. God's will. Okay. That's just one takeaway. The final one in my mind. But what else took place? What was he asking? Okay, he was asking that he really didn't want to do this. Why do you think he was saying that? There's a couple things I can think of because we already talked about them, but what are some of we shared some of it, but what are some of the things that you think that he did not want to go through this for? He's physical. He's a physical person. He's going to feel that pain. There's the stress in his mind because of the relationship that he has. Being separated from the Father himself. The one that he's been praying to for how long? Especially these last 3 years. And the examples that we see, at least, I'm sure he did it when he was younger, but we don't have a lot of information on that. We have that when he was an adult. For the last 3 years. The stress he's going to go through, especially when it talks about his sweat became like drops of blood, there is a lot of stress, mental stress that's going through the person's mind when that happens. But to have something, just a sliver stuck in my finger versus a spike, a nail, through my body, that's very different. That's a lot of pain. He's asking, is there a different way to do this? Are we asking God for some of the things that we go through? Is there a different way to do what I think I need to do? So that's what I want to take. what are some of the things that we come across that we don't want to do, but do you take that to the Father? Jesus did. I'm saying we can do the same thing, but what's the final result, as Harry said? It's what is the will of the Father. And we have to grasp that and understand it. That is the relationship that Jesus has, and I'm hoping we have. It's so... I'm not sure I really share that in my mind all the time whenever I pray in my difficult times. I have to be honest with all of those kind of things, and all of us need to be. But what happens when you realize I still need to do it? It's still the Father's will. It might be delayed because I'm focusing and not doing it, which may cause God to give me a little bit more nudging guidance that I don't want. But it's going to, like Jonah needed some, or even the story of the two sons, one who said, or the father asked him, go in the fields to work, and he said, I will, but he didn't. And the other one said no, but he did later. The one that did it actually is the one that God commends, that Jesus commends in the story. That's what I'm hoping my life is like. I'm hoping I'm doing those kind of things, and I'm praying that each of us will do that same thing. The relationship, there's going to be other things that we could talk about in the relationship that Jesus talks, that refers to us to teach us. Pray was the first one that I wanted to go through. But if you look at Matthew 5, 6, some of 7, everything that he talked about on the Sermon on the Mount, those are things that we can learn from, because Jesus was doing the same thing that he talked about in there. Being meek, being mild, being humble. There are so many things that he talks about there. Don't just stop with prayer. I just chose that one as the relationship builder, knowing that that's what he had. Folks, this is basically all I have for this morning, so we may 5 minutes early. Unless there's something else you wanted to add into what we're referring to, some experiences you want to share that were successes, perhaps some that are not, but we learned from that. That's just things that happen within our lives. And it's not to say to point fingers or anything like that. It is to educate one another, to help each other. If anybody has anything they'd like to share, that's, even if you share amongst yourselves, because we can be dismissed at this time, please just do that to help build up one another.